Well, this is a very, very special occasion tonight, and we welcome all the friends who have come, and we welcome especially Sri Pandit, our friend from India, and Ron Jorgensen and Tom. And Ron and I were, I think it was, I don't know, 3 months ago, whatever it was, Ron came to visit the community, and we were sitting around a campfire. Come on in. Over on the other side of the island, and began to get acquainted and found out that we had India in common and some other things. And Ron asking if he could bring Sri Pandit to Chinook when he came to visit in this country. And we thought that was a grand idea, so we've been in touch since. And then a few days ago, this magazine, Peacock, arrived with this long, long interview with Ron Jorgensen, describing every detail about his past and his life at the ashram, his experience there, and his friendship with Sri Pandit and some of the teachings from the ashram. And it was fun to read that, and some of us have read that to have some preparation for this evening, but not all of us have that sort of acquaintance with you and Sri Pandit and with Auroville and the ashram and the distinction between the two and all those sorts of questions. But we sense that we do have a lot in common here tonight, all of us who have come from quite different places. And we welcome the three of you. And Ron, I'm going to ask you if you would then introduce and give some more story to what has brought us here tonight.
Well, first, let me mention Tom, because he came with us. He, as a matter of fact, saw the Become article and telephoned and said he would like to offer his car to bring us over here tonight. And Tom's sitting in the corner over there, in the corner chair. I met Tom when I was recommended to see somebody about a pinched nerve that I had in my wrist by a holistic doctor, Charlie Thompson. He said Tom would be a good person to see. Tom does shiatsu and polarity therapy and reflexology and a number of other disciplines integrated into a physical and psychological therapy that he's developing, and to eventually a center for people to learn how to heal themselves through uniting with spirit and matter. And so I'm very glad that he offered to bring us here tonight, and that he's here tonight, Tom Johnston. And for the kind of background that Fritz mentions he saw in Become, it would really be hard to summarize or duplicate that. The way that happened was, I'm still not sure I understand how that happened. But I guess a good way to introduce Pandit to you is to say that is to tell you a little bit about how we met and the setting that we met in and his work. I came to the ashram in 1971 and didn't intend to stay at all, but soon decided to. And while I was there, I met him in the very beginning almost of my stay. And it was in the very beginning, and over you know how some things gradually ripen, the things that are really valuable unfold bit by bit, like a flower opens, which is what happened with the two of us, and began to not only to become friends, but also to work with him there. And in that process, became aware of the expansion and the richness of his role in what's now happening all over the world, which here seems to be a place that is very transparent to the things that are happening all over the world. It's really very fine to be in a place like this and to see how it reflects and expresses what's realizing itself everywhere else. So that while I was at the ashram and before I came back to the West last year, I'm very grateful for the time that I spent with him, and now seeing the fruition of that in his visit here in the Northwest. He's been to the United States twice before, the last 2 years before this year, but this is the first time he's been to the Northwest. And I consider this a very auspicious visit, because I consider the Northwest a very auspicious place. And I'm sure he'll tell you about the differences between the ashram and Auroville, so I won't go into that. But I just want to say that he's one of the people who has embraced both in his work, which is one of the things that I think brought us into a friendship very much. And what he now represents is not just a person who comes from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, which I have a great regard for, but nevertheless, it's not just as an ashramite or a member of Sri Aurobindo Ashram that he comes here. It's as a person that belongs to the world, the new world that's being born. And wherever people are assisting collectively or singly to help the manifestation of God or the divine bring about the transformation that we all know is embedded like a seed in the nature of everything. Wherever people are doing that, he counts himself as one of those people. He supports them, he stands with them, and he includes himself in that circle wherever it's open to him. And it's for this reason that I'm particularly happy that he's here tonight. And I know he feels part of your circle. I don't think I'll say any more. I'll just let him talk.
I feel very humble to be allowed to be present amidst you all this evening, and I am grateful to the presence that presides over this community, a community which is developing on the lines very dear to my heart. I have had occasion to visit a number of communities, institutions, movements, all working for a new era, a new dimension in the development of humanity, both in the East and the West. And I must confess that what I have seen in this country far exceeds what I have seen elsewhere, and the energy that is flowing in the new direction is something abundant and needs to be harnessed for the benefit of whole humanity. In the northwest, this area, I have seen this movement with great intensity. Each community with its own emphasis, as it should be. We don't need all communities to follow the same pattern, because one of the essential truths of spiritual unfoldment is that uniformity is not unity. There is oneness, one truth, but it throws itself, manifests into 100 variations. That makes life rich, abundant. The more the variety, the more the complexity, the richer the potency. It is a challenge to man to harmonize these complexities and develop a music with 1,000 notes. It is a cry of despair, frustration, defeat, to seek to go back to the simplicity of nature, to a civilization that has died 2,000 years ago. We have to move forward. And what I have seen here, ever since I arrived this evening, enthuses me that something is going on, linking the past with the developing future, breaking the barriers that old, out-of-date traditions have erected round religions which were originally links. Religion, a new link for man with God. Man had lost his link, and religion comes into being to join him back to his source. Time and again, the divinity that presides over this universe, consisting of this earth world and many other worlds, sends emanations, self-projections to establish these truths of linking in different countries, different societies at different ages. But all of them have this essential truth, the truth of love, the truth of harmony. It is only as the indwelling truth is covered up by institutions and religion becomes institutionalized, that religions become forces for division and not for unity. Today, all the world over, there is a recognition that the essentials of every religion are true and eternally relevant. But the external forms, the external dogmas, they have outlived their utility. And what has to emerge and link man not only with God but with the universe around is a universal religion. And a universal religion will come into being not by an artificial amalgamation of something of each religion, but on the acceptance of what are called eternal verities of life. When we recognize the oneness of life, oneness of consciousness, oneness of God, that God is not separate from this world, God is not separate from man, but God, man, and nature are formulations of one truth, one spirit. And all of us are million faces of that divinity. We have a community of interests, community of faith, community of goal. There comes the universal religion. But a true and a living universal religion can come into being only when it assures that each individual has his own religion, has his own way to God, has his own path which does not conflict and shall not conflict with the path of others. Ever since the beginning of this century, the higher mind of humanity has been moving in this direction. And my teacher, Sri Aurobindo, was one of the pioneers in this movement of universal religion, universal consciousness, and transcendence of institutionalized religions, formation of a common spirituality. Spirituality is not spiritism. Spirit is not spirits. The spirit is the essence of a thing. That thing by which each form lives, without which it will die, that is the spirit. The irreducible thing that keeps a form in existence, that is the spirit. And that spirit is the same in you, in me, in every form. It is not limited to the human species. At all levels of creation, there is that one spirit. Sri Aurobindo, he was born about 105 or 6 years ago in India, when India was still ruled by the British, as the America is at one time ruled by them. And Sri Aurobindo's father, who was a loyal citizen of the British Empire, he enrolled his son in an English-run convent when he was 5 years old in the mountains in India. And when the boy was 5, he had a dream. He saw something dark, like a cloud, coming into him and settling in himself. Since then, the boy was conscious of something heavy, something dense in himself. When he was 7, he was taken to England and put into a school with the idea that he should grow up entirely in the British traditions, British culture, far removed from Indian values. And as he grew up, he was not a particular believer in God. He was not religious. He was, frankly, an atheist. But when he was studying in Cambridge, as he was reading translations of Indian scriptures called the Upanishads by Dr. Max Muller, the famous German Orientalist, he came across a passage describing what is called in Sanskrit Atman, or in English the self, capital S. The self which is described as eternal, immortal, immutable. Behind each form, behind each world, there is this sustaining principle, sustaining truth, which is called the self. It does not change. All the changes takes place on its bosom, but it doesn't affect the white purity of its being. So this young boy was about 16. He thought, this is something that I should realize. It has a meaning. That was his first entry into the realm of the spirit. When he was 21, he came back to India, and the moment he landed on the shores of India, a vast calm and peace descended on himself. And that heaviness, which had been in him since he was 5, left him. It surrounded that peace, that calm, surrounded him for months and months together. On his return, he started taking part in the political movements of the country, promoted revolutionary activity to overthrow the British rulership. But he was in the educational field. He was teaching English and French in a university. And once, when he was driving through the Broadway, there was a possibility of an accident. He willed that there should be no accident. And to his amazement, a luminous Godhead emerged from his own being, mastered the situation, and averted the accident. That was his first experience, that God, the divinity, lives in each person, and it can govern one's life. The next prominent experience of his was when some friends desired him to accompany them in visiting a temple on the shores of a river. And in India, you know, temples, they have images or idols of stone. And in India, we worship the divine not only as Father, but also as Mother. So this temple was dedicated to the worship of the Divine Mother. He had no particular interest nor belief in this temple worship, but purely out of an architectural curiosity, he peeped into the temple, and instead of the stone image, he saw a living world mother regarding him with great intensity. Left a profound impression on him. A few years later, he happened to go to the mountains, the highest mountains in India, on a summer vacation. And there, as he was walking on the ridge of a hill, suddenly the whole world, the physical universe, disappeared from his vision. And there was the presence of the infinite, what he calls the vacant infinite. He was to write a sonnet under the title The Nirvana later on. And for his activity at that time in revolutionary politics, bomb throwing, bomb manufactures and bomb throwing, a false case was foisted upon him and he was put in jail. He was to face a trial. And at that time, when he was practicing the Indian technique of yoga, of developing one's consciousness, interiorizing the consciousness to find the divinity within oneself, to gain power, to gain force, to free his country from slavery, he suddenly had an experience when he was walking in the garden that there were no trees, there were no people, but all had the face of a universal God. Everyone had that, what you call the realization of the universal divine. When he went to the court to stand trial, he saw the British judge, the Indian consuls, all had that face, what we call Krishna, the universal Godhead. And at that time, when he had brought the revolutionary activity to a certain stage of an inevitable success, an inner voice told him to renounce politics, that God had changed his assignment from the liberation of the country to the liberation of man. Liberation of man from suffering, pain, ignorance. So he retired, left British India, and sought asylum in what was at that time French India, and there he went into exploration of his consciousness. For 4 years exclusively, he devoted himself to this inner quest and came out with a new philosophy, with a new metaphysic, which he called the doctrine of life divine. The essence of it is that this world is a manifestation of a divine spirit. There is here a divine consciousness that is evolving step by step. And right from the mineral and the stone, it has done its grades. It has come to the human level. It has arrived at a stage when evolution has become self-aware, self-directed. And if there is pain, if there is suffering, if there is falsehood and ignorance, it is because man is imperfect. And an imperfect man is not the goal. Man is meant to evolve into the image of his maker, God. And he argued, laid the metaphysic of life divine, how it was inevitable that man has to extend himself, expand himself, elevate himself, and develop his consciousness from his present mental, intellectual consciousness into a new dimension of spiritual consciousness, where there is a spontaneous sense of oneness, unity, breaking the walls of egoism, desire, and also an awareness of something divine within oneself. Man today, said, lives so much on the surface that he is unaware of 9/10 of his being. He has left to nature this evolution of man, mental man, into a spiritual man would take millenniums. But by conscious evolution, conscious effort, it is possible to deepen our levels of consciousness and find the center of truth, the center of harmony, the center of unity, the center of love within the core of one's being. And he developed techniques combining the essentials of the past and the present traditions all over the world to help man to interiorize his consciousness, to cosmicize his consciousness, and to go beyond the intellect, and to organize in himself higher faculties, higher powers of consciousness, like intuition, illumination, revelation, cosmicization, all these levels, which we glimpse in the lives of mystics and geniuses. He said that what we see in exceptional persons, there is a promise of nature. Each one, by taking appropriate steps, can receive the workings of these faculties, organize them permanently in himself, and make his life a picture of harmony, of beauty, and convert the whole world into a manifestation of the divine values of beauty, knowledge, power, harmony, and bliss. It was at this time that he was joined by a remarkable lady from France, who also had a similar vision, who had evolved similar techniques, of development of consciousness, gaining control over the latent for what they called the next stage in human evolution, to precipitate the next stage in human evolution, which is to go beyond the mind, beyond the emotions, and discover the divinity in oneself, divinity around, and divinity above. There is one scheme, one world, there is one divine. They took care to distinguish between the term divine and God. Whatever the term God originally meant, our superstitious practices, beliefs and dogmas have converted a source of love, a source of grace and a source of harmony into somebody who judges us, somebody who punishes, somebody who rewards, a justicer with the scales of justice in his hands. So the majority of human beings today think of God with awe, fear, whereas one should have a spontaneous feeling of love, of reverence, of self-giving to God. Sri Aurobindo and the mother started a movement and invited everyone who was prepared to follow, accept this ideal of life divine and practice it in day-to-day life, to gather there and gave facilities to anyone who cared or who had the urge to practice this new way of life. Till then, religion, spirituality was a call away from life into the wilderness of the spirit. Monasticism, asceticism, that was the hallmark of spirituality. Sri Aurobindo says, no, our assignment and our challenge is here in life. We have to realize God, manifest Him in day-to-day life. It is in the midst of life that the voice of God should be heard. And his ashram was started. An ashram is not a monastery, nor is it a hermitage. In the traditional Indian sense, an ashram is the house of the teacher, where the teacher receives seekers and communicates to them whatever spiritual realization he has and helps them to grow into it. So, starting with about 20 people in 1926, the ashram grew. Till today, we have about 1700 people from all parts of the world living there, not in one campus as people imagine, but spread over an area of about 15 miles, interspersed with the town and the villages where other people live, but providing a sort of a physical focus for this practice, for this philosophy. And one of the applications of this teaching is that the aim of life is not salvation, but fulfillment. Fulfillment which lies in perfection of life. A perfect man, but a man can't be perfect as long as he lives in an imperfect environment. So a perfect man, to be perfect, has to perfect his society. So a perfect man in a perfect society is the ideal given by them and practiced in their individual lives, in their collective life, by all the 1700 people living there, and thousands of people spread all over the world accepting this philosophy. And this life in the ashram is organized on what you may call a total perfection. It is not the soul alone that is to be perfected and saved and articulated, but the mind, the heart, the life energy, and the physical body. All these four, a fourfold perfection in life, is held as the ideal, whether in our social interchange, education, cultural activity, intellectual activity, spiritual endeavor. The life there is so organized that all the fields and aspects of life in the world around are represented. And you can imagine that where there are about 2,000 people living under modern conditions, there are enough aspects of life which keep us busy. So each one of us there is maintained by the ashram. None of us keeps personal wealth. None of us earns money. We give what we have to the ashram, and we are maintained, looked after by the ashram. And each one of us undertakes to participate in the collective work, do some part of the work, maybe 6 to 8 hours a day, as our consecration of energies to God. It is a part of our spiritual discipline to work without self-interest, in a way that promotes collaboration with others, offering the best of one's energies to the divine. Side by side, we develop our emotional side by way of devotion, by way of love for God, God around, and intensify by a certain catharsis, purity of emotions, elimination of ego, elimination of gross desires, and releasing the inner springs of purity, love, causeless love, effortless harmony from within the depths. There is also a culturing of the mind, studies, writings, so that all the windows of the mind are kept open to universal knowledge. Nobody can say, no teacher can say, no religion can say, no tradition can say, it has all the knowledge. Because knowledge is a dynamic, developing process. Each moment, new experience is being added, new truths and ideas come into being. And it is a dynamic process, which neither the past nor the present can say it has exhausted. So, encouragement is given, and a training is also offered, by which one acquaints oneself with the scriptures and the traditions all over the world, and one learns to move with the times, recognizing that the best that our logical mind, the mind of the intellect can formulate, is only a fraction of the true knowledge which is ineffable, which is inaccessible to the logical mind. Sri Aurobindo says that the knowledge of God, that the knowledge, entire knowledge of the universe, cannot be grasped by the human mind as it is. But one can enter into identity with it in one's consciousness. One can feel one's unity with it. And for that, a development of consciousness, a culturing of consciousness is necessary. This is the life that is being lived in the ashram. It is a kind of what we call in yoga, in India, yoga. Yoga is union with the divine, union with the truth, and the process or the practice that leads to this union. In this place, in this institution, where this yogic thrust was the main thing. For the last 50 years it has been going on. There were certain yogic restrictions, like no sex, no smoking, no drinking, and no politics. Beyond that, there were no other regulations. And each one of us felt them necessary, so that all our energies could flow towards the ideal. We had no family lives. Even when we came with families, we became individual members of the ashram. And all the movements of energy, consciousness flowed towards the divine. Doubts were expressed whether man will work without an economic incentive, economic motive. We found when there is an idealistic impulse, when the question is one of offering one's energies to God, the quality of work improves. It does not deteriorate. And work provides a field to learn how to associate oneself, cooperate with others on a basis of harmony, on a basis of equality. In this place, all are equal. In the East particularly, the categories, the castes, the classes count very much. Unlike in America, where you have a certain fundamental equality. In the East it is not so. Ours was the first institution where all these barriers are abolished, rich or poor, higher caste or lower caste, race, whichever the race, black, brown, white, all are treated equally. Everybody forgets from which country he comes. They practice, in a way, the ideal of human unity. After 50 years of experience, experimentation, and proving to oneself the viability of such a program, of the practical nature, possibility of a pattern of society which is neither communist nor based on laissez-faire principles, what we call democracies, capitalists. The mother, who is the collaborator of Sri Aurobindo, Sri Aurobindo had passed away in 1950, she initiated a new experiment called Auroville, which is the planetary city, aimed at having about 50,000 people in a new kind of environment with its own divisions of green belt, belt of factories, education, culture, and so on, so as to avoid the ecological complications that have beset the modern world. And about 11 years ago, this experiment of Auroville, which means the city of dawn, was started. People who were prepared to adopt this new way of life, which means abolition of private wealth, no money. Second, ideal of human unity, citizens of the one world, and development of consciousness. On these three principles, a new city was founded, and about 138 countries from all over the world sent some earth from their country's soil as a symbolic gesture of cooperation. And all that was brought by the representatives, and it was placed in an urn in the form of a lotus. A lotus signifies in spiritual symbolism the blossoming of consciousness to the touch of the divine truth. And that is the foundation of Auroville. It started in 1968, February 28. 68, am I right? 68. Since then, we have about 500 people from all over the world, about 25 countries who have gathered, who have accepted this way of life and they have been self-organized into about 20 settlements, some agricultural, some horticultural, some agro-industries, and so on. And this experiment is going on a basis of decentralization. There is no boss, there is no individual leader in Auroville. The mother passed away some 6 years ago, and since then, those who live in Auroville are learning to meet together, decide their priorities on a certain system of consensus, concerned people meeting and carrying the others. And nobody in Auroville keeps personal money. We are producing about 1/3 of what we need by agriculture, by cultivation and sale of fruits, things like that. And the rest of our needs comes from voluntary contributions and donations and gifts from all over the world. The whole world is watching whether this experiment can work, because everywhere they are struggling to find a different way of life. Some are obsessed with the evils of technology, some with political ideologies, some with economic challenges, whether by abolition of money as a means of exchange, abolition of private property, by making religion an individual affair and not a collective institution, by arranging things in such a way that nobody stands between you and your Maker, no intercessors between God and man. Whether man can't, he has arrived at such a stage today of evolution of consciousness that can't he forge his own link with God? Why does he need another person to do that for him? This encouragement of self-reliance, self-discovery, that is Auroville. And after 10 or 11 years, there has been a kind of slowing of this movement, because again, whatever the outer appearances, there is a struggle between the past and the new. The old habits of humanity, individualism, egoism, my interests, and the call of the universal spirit. There is always a conflict at different levels. We always talk of platitudes and general principles, but when it comes to the question of individual sacrifice, there is a hesitation. There is a slurring. And this kind of an atavistic assertion of old habits has slowed down the progress of Auroville. There are 120 or 25 Frenchmen, about 100 Americans, the rest from about another 100 from the various other countries, about 100 Indians. We have not had any problem of a racial kind, any problem between particular nationalities, but the problems are between the old and the new. Somebody says, that land was purchased by me and I have an authority over all that goes on that land. People who live on that land, they say, no, here there is no question of private property. Those who live on the land shall decide how they will live. And then, who is to decide who is right? I say this is to be done. Another person says, no, this is to be done. Formerly, there was a leader, there was somebody who would say, no, this is to be done, and both the parties accept. Now a providential situation has arisen where there is no boss to say. When it is easy to follow a leader, we just suspend our judgment. It is a smoke screen for laziness. Now the onus is put on each individual. He has to work physically, mentally, spiritually. The challenge is facing him. They are learning to live together. They are learning to solve their problems together. And it is a rule there that no courts, no law courts, no police, no military. We are aiming at a state of society when there will be no government. The more cultured, the more civilized the society becomes, the less it will need to be governed by a government. Particularly those who are spiritually awake, spiritually sensitive, they don't need to be governed from outside. Each one carries the government within himself. And wherever we have seen these basic spiritual principles are observed, a person cares and cherishes spiritual values, there are no problems. It is this lesson of Auroville that a man needs to be spiritual. A man needs to be awake to his spiritual inner guidance before he can build an Auroville that I want to communicate everywhere where I go. It is not the building of cities, it is not the construction of buildings that is going to give you a new age or a new community or a new consciousness. After building wonderful architectural constructions, if it is the old people with the old mind and spirit who are going to live there, it will not make any difference to the world. I remember how I narrated this at that conference the other day. The UNESCO had deputed a South American lady to go all over the world to study the various experiments in human settlement, Africa, Asia, Europe. And at the end of her tour, she came to Auroville. She stayed there, she saw. This was about 4 years ago. And then she met me. At the conclusion of her visit, she met me and she said, the one thing that impressed me here was that everywhere else they first build cities and get men to live there. But here you are first preparing men and leave them to build their cities. This emphasis on preparing ourselves, first realizing the truth of new consciousness, new community, new culture of unity, of universality within ourselves is the first requisite. So we have to educate ourselves, educate those around us in these values, in these techniques. And each individual must have a program for himself to culture his consciousness, culture one's consciousness towards a new direction of love, of harmony, of collaboration, before one can hope to build new communities. For communities for sake of communities has no meaning. If just 100 people get together and start a life, common life with common kitchen, common prayers, common studies, well, we are repeating the old fiasco. Doesn't matter if there are 10 people, but if each one is building a new life, a new consciousness in himself, well, that is bound to articulate itself in external life. The external life must be a reflection and a medium for the inner growth of consciousness. And for that, we have to guard against vested interests. Even in religion, even in spirituality, vested interests spring up. Nobody should hold an office for too long a time. There should be a rotation, always a rotation, so that each person has an experience. And we have to take care to see that we don't encrust ourselves in an organization. Wherever there is an organization, there the evils of organizations come. We have to keep our aspirations and our seekings into a movement, a developing movement. But with a minimum skeletal organization to provide a physical focus. It is easy enough to form a community of ideas, community of faith, but on the physical level, in the physical world, you must have a physical focus where people sharing the same aspirations, same goals, looking at the same goals, can meet together, can strengthen each one's aspiration. But that too shall not get unwieldy. It has to be kept in limited form. A movement has worldwide ramifications, but it must have a physical focus where the energy, central energy, is concentrated, where all people can gather whenever they choose, charge their batteries, but it should not be organized around any one or two individuals. Because I have seen wherever institutions or communities, centers are too much identified with individuals, with the passing of the individuals, the life force departs and they wither away. Things may start with individuals, but it is the responsibility of individuals, those individuals, to prepare a certain diversification, a certain dispersion of energies, decentralization. And even in one's own lifetime, one must learn to withdraw and entrust the responsibilities to other generations of people. These are some of the thoughts that I had to share with you. I was asked, what's the relation between the ashram and Auroville? As you will see, Auroville has been an extension of the ashram, but with this change, that the restrictions that were natural to an ashram devoted to yoga are not operative there. The mother said that Auroville shall have no rules and no regulations. It must be a free development, a spontaneous development. And there are no restrictions on sex, there are no restrictions on other things. Only, she said, drugs shall not be permitted. Because our central aim is development and culture of consciousness. And drugs disintegrate the consciousness. It cuts at the root of our movement. If you have any questions, I am open to them.
Sri Pandit, when you say there's no sexual restrictions on the community, does that mean no sexual restrictions whatsoever?
Yes, because we proceed on this principle that a man and a woman should live together only as long as they love each other. Once there is no love, there is no point in their being forced to live together. So there is no, in Auroville there is no institution of marriage. There is no institution of families as we know. They are all members of Auroville. In this transitional period, this freedom, this liberty has been converted into license by some members. They have converted into indiscriminate sex. But there is nothing that we can do about it. We have to pay the penalty. If we have to learn the new rhythm of human adjustment, such a period we have to pass through. But once one is given complete freedom, after a while we have seen that things do come back to a certain sanity. There will be how many after the 500 people? There may be about 10 or 15 who still make, let's say, license of this thing and they want to have indiscriminate sex. But the majority are living very well. They respect each other's love. They have children. And the children are not treated as children of those parents, the children of Auroville. They don't carry their parents' names. And if things go well, they have plans to have small, homes where the children will be taken care of by experts in child raising, eugenics, nourishment, so that they grow as members of world family, not as a family related by blood ties. And you can't imagine it will go well in America, but in India, with that orthodox tradition and background, this is something revolutionary. But India has always been tolerant. They are watching how we are solving the problem. We have always this problem of untouchability. Just as you have problems here of whites and blacks, we have problems of untouchability. People who are called, outside the pale of this caste system, they are not touched. How we are going to solve the problem? But here we have solved in Auroville. They are members of Auroville, those who are there, those who are willing to come. We eat at the same table with them. A thing which is unheard of in India.